Welcome, everyone. I already unofficially welcomed you. I want to officially welcome you to the Therapy Ed online office hours. And I'm so pleased to be part of this endeavor because Therapy Ed offers these at no charge to participants. And I think that's really helpful. Hopefully you'll find it helpful as well. Tonight, our topic is occupation-based models, so models of practice. And there was a question of the week. If you're not familiar with those, they're posted on Thursdays on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then the answers posted on Sunday. And then on Tuesday, that relates to the topic that we'll be talking about. And the question will be repeated again. So we'll get to that afterwards. So based on my quick survey, we have a mix of OTs, students, grads, as well as OTAs. And this is geared towards both. And I will be making mention of the review and study guide where you can find this information. Okay, I'll be letting people in along the way, so bear with me on that, please. So please know that this is copyrighted information, and we expect that you will follow ethical practices and that you will adhere to copyright so that you don't try to share it or store it in any way. But I certainly hope that you'll show up more and more frequently for online office hours. If you're not aware of it, we do record these, and then they're available on the Therapy Ed YouTube channel. Once they're posted, they stay on YouTube for 1 month. So they're not up continuously, but that way you will have access to them. And if you have the Therapy Ed review and study guide, either for the OTA or the OT, then you have the same reference that I'll be using to give the information. So you can look at it to get more information. And obviously, if it still doesn't make sense to you, go to your textbook, go to other web-based resources to get the information, because you can expect there to be questions on your exam that relate to, first of all, the meaning and the power of occupation. And secondly, these occupation-based models as frames of reference, models of practice upon which we base our therapy. Hold on, I'm just letting a couple more people in. Here we go. So please stay muted. I did set it so that anybody who came in would be muted, unless you have something that you want to share with us. And then I encourage you to either raise your hand or put something in the chat or open up your mic. So we're focusing on, this is a narrow focus on occupation-based models as they may be pertinent to your certification exam. So they're primarily in chapters 3 and 13 in the OTA certification exam review and study guide, and 3 and 14 in the OT certification exam review and study guide from Therapy Ed. So I think that it's important, first of all, to talk about the commonalities and why we even have models of practice based on occupation. So let's see if this will work for me. Maybe not. Just one moment. I think I'm going to have to bring this up first and then be able to share it. Let's see if I can share it now. There we go. So I'm pulling this information from the Therapy Ed OT review and study guide, but it's the same in the OTA. So I'm not going to read all this to you. I'm going to summarize it on the PowerPoint, but I wanted to show you an example of the information that you can find in the review and study guide. So these are basic principles of occupations and what their value is to occupational therapy as a profession and us as OT practitioners. So let's just look at the first one. The principle is that occupations and activities act as a therapeutic change agent to remediate or restore. And then there's an explanation of that and an example. So these principles that I'm going to go over briefly I'm just going to hit some highlights, realize that there's more information in the review and study guide. Does that help? And this is information that I'm sure you've had in some of your foundational OT courses, and also in the OT practice framework. It, of course, looks at, it's not exactly the same information, but it looks at the value of occupation. So there are several principles, an explanation of the principle, and then an example. Okay, so let me go back to the other one. So the one that I read to you is the value of occupation. Please note here that I've put the page numbers for the 9th edition of the review and study guide, the OT 9th edition. So that's first, followed by those that are kind of a tan color. That's the 10th edition. So after this slide, I'm not going to say 10th edition each time, but I do have it bolded and in that different color font so that you can pick that out. Can you tell me in the chat, please, do you have the OT review and study guide? If so, is it the 9th or the 10th edition? Or do you have the OTA review and study guide? It's okay if you don't have either. I'm just trying to see where what resources you're using, where you're drawing your information from. Okay, so for OT, the 10th edition is the most recent, and I'm already hearing that it's being used widely. If you have the 9th edition, please don't feel that you need to buy the 10th edition, because the 9th edition has, see, we have a mix here. The 9th edition has the content that you need for the exam. Other than preventing professional burnout, which is now fair game for the exam as of the 2024 guidelines for content for the exam. Okay, and then there's OTA, thank you. Okay, I think I got them all. So by the way, as we're going through this session, if I miss something, for example, if you put a question in the chat, excuse me, that doesn't relate to what I'm talking about at that moment, or if I need to keep going so I don't lose the train of what we're talking about, then please remind me if I miss it. I will go back and check towards the end, but it's disruptive to the process if I stop and answer. So if you can, save your questions till the end. And if you feel like you have a question that's relevant at that time, feel free to post it. And if I can address it, then I will. I hope that you won't have any unanswered questions by the time we're done. So first of all, we look at the value of occupation. So all of these occupation-based models are, not surprisingly, based on occupation, as we define occupation as a profession. And the thought is, the principle is the use of occupation as an intervention, and then participation in occupation as the goal. So you may have read in some of the literature that we believe in occupation as both a means, that's our intervention, and an end, that's the goal. That occupation is client-centered, and that it's a collaborative process to provide occupation-based approaches, occupation-based intervention. So these are common across the different occupation-based models. I believe that there are more things that they have in common than are different. So if you remember these basic principles, they apply to all the occupation-based models. The occupation-based models in the literature are also referred to as ecological models because they always include the environment, the ecology, or they might be occupational performance. Depends on the literature you read and how they categorize them. So we also believe that there's a dynamic interaction between the person, the environment, and the occupation when we're using any of these models. And all of them are applied across the lifespan. So they're lifespan models intended to be used with anybody who's receiving OT services. Because if you have an occupation-based model, even if you use it with another one, like let's say you use an occupation-based model along with the biomechanical model, that's what keeps us true to our core, the core being occupation-based practice. And evaluation and intervention both focus on occupations and occupational performance. So you can see these concepts and these commonalities reflected in the OT practice framework, but the OT practice framework is designed to define and delineate the process and the domain of occupational therapy. It's not a model of practice. So the focus also, here's some new page numbers for you. I'm going to go on to the model of human occupation. So it also has those things that I just mentioned as commonalities. But the focus is, not surprisingly with the title, on occupation and occupational engagement. So each model has its own vocabulary, its own language that helps specifically describe that perspective of occupational therapy. So I view the models of practice as being the lens through which you view practice. So that colors your view of the person, your view of what occupational therapy is, and the types of evaluation and intervention that we provide. So the model of human occupation is looking at that dynamic interaction among the person, occupation, and environment. This was the first model, first published in 1980, that looked at that overview of person, occupation, environment. And it came from Mary Riley's work in occupational behavior. So it actually looks at the person's motivation to engage in occupation. We look at that more broadly now than we did at the time that this came out. This was the first model to look at motivation, which was referred to as volition, as being part of what occupational therapy should look at. So this conceptualizes the person as being comprised of three different and interrelated subsets. So volition, habituation, and performance capacity. So volition is making choices. It's the motivation to engage. It's having interests in specific occupations. And then habituation is really all about developing habits and routines that support your occupational performance and your occupational engagement. Performance capacity is what we might refer to as performance skills in other language. So it's looking at things like motor, cognitive, and process skills to engage successfully in occupations. This model also is very clearly related to the environment. So it's physical and social environments and the occupational environments in which we perform occupations. It was originally proposed to be the generic, broad view of occupational therapy that everybody could adopt, no matter what clientele you were working with or what setting. And obviously, occupational therapy as a profession didn't embrace it as the only one because we have other occupation-based models, but it's still very broadly applied. It's the model of practice that's the most well-researched, and studies support that it's used by 80% of occupational therapists. It's also used worldwide. So therapists and researchers in other countries have also embraced this model and even contributed to the development and articulation of this model. So if you're having an occupation-based model, I'd be surprised if you don't have any questions on the model of human occupation, also referred to as MOHO. So under the model of human occupation, and again, I have the page numbers here for you so you can look them up. There are many specific MOHO-based assessments. The belief, according to this model, is that you really should have an assessment that theoretically was developed to be consistent with the principles of the model of human occupation. So the MOHOST, model of human occupation screening tool, is the screening tool for this model. But there are others like the interest checklist, the OCARES, the OSA, the role checklist, the AMPS, So there are more, a number of assessments. Last time I counted, there was probably 20 assessments that were specifically developed to be used following this model. So that if you use that assessment, your perspective of the person and the data you gather is consistent with this model. Therefore, your intervention can be consistent with the principles of the model. Sorry, didn't mean to turn it. I was letting somebody in. So the intervention is focused on engagement and occupations. That's no surprise, is it? And so it's that learning by doing. How does one learn? How does one develop? How does one reach occupational, how does one engage in occupational performance and occupational engagement? And it's by doing. So it's learning the occupations by doing the occupations. So the intervention has to be specifically meaningful to the person. You've heard that before. Purposeful to the individual, group, or agency. And it has to be relevant to both the individual and the context. So it can be used but with groups as well as individuals across the lifespan. Another popular model of practice is person, environment, occupation, or PEO. So again, it's looking at the occupation performance being dynamic and ever changing. And it also looks at occupational performance across the lifespan. So instead of the focus on occupational engagement, like with MOHO, PEO looks at occupational performance. So just some slight differences in the language that can help you when you have a question that relates to any of these models of practice. So it's possible that you'll have a question that starts with the therapists in this setting are using PEO. Which of the following would be appropriate for their assessment? Or which of the interventions would be appropriate? So it's not saying the only one that would fit with this, but out of the choices that they give you, what's theoretically consistent with the model that's being presented? So this looks at, remember the 3 circles? I bet you had those in school. It looks at the transactions between the person, environment, and occupation. So those in total equal occupational performance. So where they intersect is occupational performance. And you can even use the 3 circles as a tool when you're doing your evaluation, because there's no specific assessment that has been selected for use with this model. But what you're looking at ultimately is different aspects of the person, different aspects of the environment, and different aspects of the occupations in which the person or group engages. So we look at what are the issues that this person is facing, and the person identifies that. That would be the occupational profile. So you can provide that assessment, that beginning of your evaluation at the person level, at the environmental level, at the occupational performance level, or at the occupation level. So you can look at them in total, that's the occupational performance, or any subcomponent of this model for your evaluation. And you can use different occupation-based assessments. So there aren't specific ones that theoretically are only used in PEO, but there are many occupation-based assessments available for use. By the way, I'd like to give you 2 definitions. The first definition is evaluation. Evaluation is a process in which you select your assessments, administer them, and then interpret the results. Whereas an assessment is a tool or a strategy that you use to gather information about a person or a group. Hear the difference? Assessment is the tool or strategy, whereas evaluation is the process, which includes administering assessments. So intervention, according to the PEO, again, not a surprise, is collaborative, it's occupation-based, client-centered, and it's a flexible process. So there are not strict, rigid guidelines for PEO. It's very broad-based, and a multitude of occupations are used for intervention. And it's looking at, again, those relationships across P, E, and O. So they call it transactions. So transactional relationships. And we're looking at what are the specific issues that this individual, our client, is facing, whether it's within the person or it's within the context, the environment. So moving on to occupational adaptation, the focus is, again, remember all of those things that we talked about with the principles of occupation hold true here. Plus, it's looking at the complex process that the person goes through to adapt to their environment. I'd like that the title of this model is descriptive of what it's looking at, occupational adaptation. So it's looking how the person can adapt to their environment. And how do we do that? By engaging in occupations. So how do we learn the skills necessary to meet the needs of the demands of the environment and meet the needs of the person? It's through that engaging in occupations and adapting to, and not adaptation in the same way that OTs adapt activities, but developing the skills that allow you to adapt to the environment and what the environment expects of you, what the interaction with the environment, how that impacts you and your engagement in occupation. So what we're looking for here, a successful outcome using occupational adaptation, also referred to as OA, is occupational competence. That's the phrase that's used to indicate improved function. So again, it's holistic, it's lifespan, it's suitable for use in multiple settings. And there's 3 elements. They look at the person, occupational environment, and then the interaction among those elements. The person, instead of being comprised of the things that we talked about with MOHO, is comprised of different components. They are sensory motor, cognitive, and psychosocial. So we break down different aspects of the person into these components. And then the occupational environment. So here are the different language that's used. The occupational environment looks at physical, social, and cultural systems or factors. So now we're going to move on to ecology of human performance. And remember, there are more things that are alike in these models than are different. So it was originally developed, interestingly enough, to be used across disciplines. It wasn't developed to be specific to OT, which I find very interesting. And so they use different language. Instead of using occupation, they use task because it's more understandable across disciplines. So this model focuses on person, context, and task. So these use different languages or different terms. I'm sorry. There's different language vocabulary associated with these models. So if you just remember a few key words for each of these models, it helps you to distinguish one from another. So I don't have all of the assumptions here for you because I didn't want to just read them to you. But there's 11 main assumptions that you use to guide practice. Here's an example. Ecology refers to the interaction between the person and the environment. So guess what? The ecology of human performance is interested in that. Performance is based on interaction between person, context, and task. Each person is considered unique in terms of their sensory motor, cognitive, and psychosocial skills. And then the person's performance is based on, and this, they use the word transaction more in our current theory than in the past. So again, it's based on the transaction between the person and the context. I really like the use of the term transaction so that it's looking at it in a broader sense. It's not just the interaction between the person and context, it's the transaction. So the person impacts the context and the context impacts the person. So I like that. So how do you know the difference between PEO and EHP? So part of it is the language that's used. So they do talk about, so EHP doesn't talk about environment, it talks about context. Does it include the physical and social environment? Yes, but it uses the language context, whereas PEO uses the language environment. And these assumptions for EHP are broad and in more accessible language because it was to be used across disciplines, and it is indeed used across disciplines. Does that help at all? Whereas PEO is a specific OT model of practice.
I had another question.
Sure.
Um, so I feel like Moho also looks at person, environment, and occupation. So how would you distinguish it between PEO as well?
I see a lot of overlap between PEO and model of human occupation, but the biggest difference that I see is that the model of human occupation, first of all, it's theoretically very deep. I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg, and it really looks at things like occupational disposition and uh, more in depth about what's going on within the person. It also is looking specifically at the use of their specific assessments. They are theoretically based, and specific intervention that's theoretically based, whereas PEO is very broad. You can use any occupation that's meaningful to the individual. MOHO's steeped in theory and principles of theory that you need to apply to have successful outcomes. And the therapy ed review and study guide really only touches the tip of the iceberg on that model. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And model of human occupation looks at volition, habituation, performance capacity. Yes, MOHO is big on motivation, with the belief being that it used to look at motivation as being the first step. It looked at it in a hierarchical perspective. It doesn't now. So it's not like one system is overriding another one, a subsystem. So the person's comprised of volition, habituation, performance capacity. And volition is that motivation. It's making a choice, having an interest in different occupations, and actually the motivation to engage. So it's not that the other models don't look at motivation, but it's just such a primary piece of MOHO. And I get it that these are very similar and it's hard just to distinguish between them. If you read more literature, I'm just looking at it very briefly. The problem with any review of this content is that it's really looking, it's assuming that you already know this. And so that what we're doing is going over some of the main points. If this isn't comfortable to you, or if you didn't learn it well in the past, then it's time to dig in a little, because especially for the OT, but also the OTA, I'm going to be very surprised if you don't have questions on your exam that relate to theory. Now, it might not be these, it might be biomechanical approaches, it might be motor control approaches. Those are still theoretically based questions. So you need to understand the theory, the model, and how it's used in OT, especially when you look at what does that mean you do for evaluation? Are there specific assessments that fit that model, or are there not? And then what does it mean for intervention? Are there principles that guide practice, and we always do this before we do that? So things like that that you need to consider. It's your different view of the world. So it's like taking off one pair of glasses and putting on a lens of a different color. It's not that occupational therapy has changed, but your view of the person, their occupational performance, and what occupational therapy can do changes by a different shade of color. So with the evaluation for EHP, there are multiple checklists that are specifically developed for use with this model. And you would go through the checklist. So what you would do, like an occupational profile, to identify what are the priority issues this person is contending with. And then we decide where's our focus on the person, environment, that individual's priorities, certainly. And it's based on task analysis as well. Now, notice they don't say occupational analysis or activity analysis, is task analysis, because that's language that's more understandable across disciplines. And then there's 5 specific strategies for intervention. And this is going to sound familiar based on what you know about the OT practice framework. Establish and rapport, or restore, not rapport. Establish and restore, alter, adapt, modify, prevent, and create. So let me see if this will let me do this. Can you see the review and study guide again?
Yes.
Thank you. Sometimes Zoom will work that way and sometimes not. Oops, that wasn't the page. Hold on. Let me just make sure I get the page number here. I must have an error. Oops, hold on. Sorry, I did something that Zoom didn't like. Oh, I see what it did. Okay, so if I go here to Ecology of Human Performance, here it talks about the checklist. Oh, and the sensory profile is another one that's used according to this model. And here's a description of the 5 specific strategies. Can you see that okay, everyone? So is task analysis the same as activity analysis and occupational analysis? For the most part, it is. But again, we're looking at it from a little bit different perspective. So it is still breaking down the task into its component parts and what you have to be able to do in order to accomplish that task. Okay, so establish and rapport relates to enhancing a person's abilities by teaching skills. Alter is to assess a person's context to determine which is best match for the person's abilities. Adapt, modify, it's the same as what you would already know about that. So it's changing the context or the task in some way so the person can be successful. Prevent is to minimize risks that might create future problems. We're trying to prevent other disruption in occupational performance. And this model tends to talk about human performance more than occupational performance, again, because it's a multidisciplinary approach. And then create is assisting the person by promoting, enriching, and promoting, I'm going to say enrichment and complex performances in the person's context. That's not a grammatically correct sentence. Okay, does that help? So these are the specific strategies that go along with this model. So even though this has more information than I have on my PowerPoint, it's not thorough. If you want more information, and this is true with anything you're studying for this exam, often review materials are not sufficient. It can be the primary resource for your study for this exam, but as much as people say, oh, that book is too dense, there's too much information, it's still not enough. This assumes that you understand this. If you don't understand it, you need to go pull out a textbook. So someplace in your books, you would have information on theory. Maybe you even kept your book from your theory course, and or your theory was blended into other courses that you went through. Okay, so does that make sense? It's important to go back to that information. The same thing is true. Can you see the PowerPoint now? Is it back to that?
Yes.
Thank you. Notice I don't trust Zoom. So with anything, like people have told me things like, oh, it's all that upper extremity rehab that gets me. And I don't understand it. Or it's early childhood development, or it's working with children in a school. We all have our challenges. If you don't understand it well and the information in whatever review material you're using isn't helpful, you need more, go to a book. The item writers from Therapy Ed, I am so sorry, from MBCOT, are trained to write these items. And then when they write the rationale, because indeed they have to have a rationale, they must provide a reference to support that rationale. And guess what they use for references? The textbooks most commonly used in OT programs. So if you're still a student, I recommend you keep your books. Don't sell your books back. It's important, in my opinion, to have a professional library. And you can't Google everything. All right, so, or you can Google it and you may or may not get the information you want. So keep your books, because sometimes it really helps to just go read a chapter on a particular topic, and you have the narrative, the story that goes with it, and more detailed information. Any comments on that part? Have any of you thought about that? No comments? Okay. So I already told you earlier, but I'll repeat it again. Every week there's an exam item posted on social media. So it's posted on Thursdays on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And it relates to the content for the next week's office hour. And then the answers are posted on Sundays. Then the night of the content, like tonight, the question is shown again. Okay, so each week you have a question, and hopefully that helps you to look at the information. So I'm going to put this up. Hold on, let me get my stopwatch, because I'm going to time it. I'm going to give you a minute. When you're practicing for this exam, unless you get testing accommodations, you really should be trying to do an average of 1 question per minute. So here we go, everybody. 1 minute, and then I'll put up the poll. Okay, that's 1 minute. The only reason I timed it is because that's the pace you need to get used to. But I'm going to give you a little bit longer to finish up the question. So on the actual exam, if you haven't seen a practice exam or taken the exam in the past, you may have 3 possible responses or 3 possible answers, or 4. And both the OTA and the OT exam have multi-select questions as well. For the OTA exam, they are individual questions, each of which has 6 answers and 3 are correct. For the OT exam, they're grouped together as a set. They're called scenario sets. There are 4 items that are based on the same opening scene. And again, there's 6 answers provided, 3 are correct. Okay, anybody else? I'm going to wrap this up. We're up to 61%. Last chance. Anybody want to jump in? 64%? 66? Come on, you guys can do it. Let's go. I'll be your cheerleader. 67%. Do I hear 70? We're up to 69. 70. We did it. 72. 74. When you're doing practice questions, it's important for you to commit to an answer because it's very easy to just say, I don't know, and then go look at the answer. But that doesn't make you make a decision, and you need to practice that, okay? So thank you, we're up to 74%. Let me share the results. A whopping 61% answered B, followed by C, then A, then D. Are you ready? The best answer is B. So it's the interactive activities which can be adapted. Remember I said adapt is one of the interventions. So what we're looking at here is, first of all, the setting, adult daycare. So adults in adult daycare, it's important for them to have that social participation. That's one of the main reasons why adult daycare programs exist. It's for individuals to have that socialization, to interact with others, and to have activities and support. And typically transportation is provided. Typically meals are provided, like often it's through Meals on Wheels. So it's a way for them to be away during the day, away from home, and to help them maintain skills so that they continue to live at home. So there are social model daycare programs and there are medical model daycare programs. But here we're looking at adapting those interactive activities. So we're looking at, look at this question again, we're looking at interactive activities. So they are interacting with each other. They're interacting with the activity itself. And we're adapting it so that each person can be successful. Questions on that? Okay, so before I open it up to any other questions, I mean like general questions more than the models of practice, I want to let you know that these online office hours are every Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m. We have a few holidays, but it's very few. And we also have individual tutoring. And if you've taken the exam preparation course before, you can take it again for free at no additional cost. You just need to look on therapyed.com at the locations and dates of upcoming courses. Some are online, some are in person. Select the course that would best fit your needs and then contact the office. Don't try to register for that online because you'll be charged. Can I go over the difference between psychodynamic frame of reference versus CBT? Whoa, let me see if I can remember much about psychodynamic. So I'll give it a shot. Okay. Can I say that one more time about the class? So if you've taken the course before, the exam prep course, you can do a retake for free. Okay. And to do so, you go to therapyed.com, look at the variety of courses that are being offered, select the one for which you want to register, and then contact Therapy Ed. There's a contact us link tab on the webpage. You can use that. You can send it to info@therapyed.com. There's also a phone number that you can call. And you tell them you want to register for that and that you've taken the course before. It helps if you remember when you took it or where, so that they can check their records. Okay, I'm going to get back to those questions. Hold on. So we also have an app, and this is fairly new, and I'm hearing good things about it. I don't have a lot of information, but the people I've tutored, I'm also one of the Therapy Ed tutors, they report that it's been a game changer for some of them because it's on the go approach. So it's only used on mobile apps. So like on mobile devices, like your cell phone, a tablet, and it's easier to get to rather than the online exams. I do want to be very honest and straightforward with you and let you know that the app has the same questions as the online exams that you get with the review and study guide. But what I love about it is it uses artificial intelligence. So it gives you ongoing, in the moment feedback on where you are in terms of understanding the content, your critical reasoning, and your performance across the 4 domains. And we have what we call our learning assistant that you can ask whatever questions you want, and it will look up information for you. It helps you to review the questions by giving you more information, and you can also ask it other questions. I don't have the app, I have it on the online practice exams. It's my newest favorite toy. Excuse me. Okay, so let me check the chat again. So the app is not included with the review and study guide. The app is separate. If you're interested in the app, and I'm not trying to upsell you on anything, everybody, if you're interested in it, buy it from Therapy Ed because it's on sale for $49.99. If you buy it from Memorang or a place like Google Store, they're going to charge you $99.99. That's the full price. Okay, so it's a 1-year subscription to be able to use this. Any of you on tonight, have you used it? Can you give any feedback? You're the experts on that. So we are done with the content. I'm going to stop the record and then maybe people will feel more comfortable speaking up. So hold on.